Paul Trombley.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Good morning, everyone. Tuesday. I'm Andy Brownell. Tom Ostrom is here, of course. Good morning, Tom.
Hi, Andy.
Well, both the Vikes and the Green Bay Packers had close calls.
Close calls, each winning by a touchdown and a field goal or something, but a point after.
But a win is a win.
Did you get up early to watch the London game?
I did. I don't appreciate that on a weekend, but I did.
Yeah, that's that 7-hour difference or so that we had to cope with.
Yeah, it was a little bit more harrowing than we would have liked.
Yeah, me too, with Packers. But they did it. But the game ended before more damage was done.
Well, what do we have in the mailbag to start with?
The Babylon Bee is, with its humor, it is so on target with the politics. It's just got these people in power figured out. The Babylon Bee, the political satirists, with FEMA responding inadequately to the hurricane and flooding in the southeast, North Carolina has asked Ukraine President Zelensky for $100 billion of his U.S. funding as citizens work to rescue their neighbors. And he's the man with the money, said the North Carolina governor. I have faith in the Biden administration, but they're not helping us, and we have to get help. So I got Zelensky on the phone, and they said, well, it's difficult for us to help you because we don't know where all the money you've sent us went.
Oh, my gosh.
There's so much of it over the last years, we can't keep track of it. And at publishing time, North Carolina sent an urgent plea to the Afghan Taliban asking if it had any spare U.S. helicopters to help. Isn't that clever, Andy?
Biting humor in the midst of a tragedy, that's for sure.
It is, and the incomparable actions of our government that they're just on top of. And then Branko, satirical cartoonist, it shows Biden with a U.S. money bag of billions of dollars, handing it over to Ukraine, and it shows a Hurricane Helene flood victims reaching out for money, and Biden says, no more FEMA money. We've given it all we have to you. We have other illegal immigrants and other nations to give money to. There's some truth there, too. From Pat Carroll. Glad you and Andy are still on the radio. And Pat had contact and a friend with a group called Faith in Minnesota at a meeting, and he said they are not what they seem. They'll tell you they're for all Minnesotans. They want us to come to better, but they're pushing a woke leftist partisan agenda from the Democrat Party. Yes, there are things the Democrats do that help all of us, but you can't incorporate their philosophies into city council races that are supposed to be nonpartisan. And they have donated $21,000 to candidates in Rochester to push their agenda very aggressively. The candidates say this won't affect how they vote, though. But and so I Googled Faith in Minnesota. And if you do that, you'll find their agenda is aggressive, which Pat said these people were at a meeting, and they're acting on the social welfare left-wing woke agenda, what they want for Rochester. And as Pat said, our local elections are supposed to be nonpartisan, but you can Google Faith in Minnesota and see what they're up to. That's the mailbag.
I think more significant than the actual dollar amounts is the number of people that they've been able to recruit to do door-to-door campaigning on behalf of certain candidates. that could put those candidates at a significant advantage to have that kind of support at the street level. And those who, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes social media discussions about this, obviously, because it's something relatively new to local politics. I think it's probably inevitable as the city gets larger and larger and the various issues that are being dealt with become more and more divisive in some ways. Yeah. I mean, obviously, they're well within their rights to fund a campaign and organize on their behalf. That's part of the American system, the United States.
But as Pat said, it's a tradition in Minnesota and in Rochester to be nonpartisan.
It is. Tradition, true. And still the ballots will continue to not list party affiliation. But as far as what's happening on the campaign trail, there's no real rules involved as far as which groups can support which groups. But you're correct. The parties themselves have, in the past, steered clear of getting involved in city council races in Rochester. And some argue that this group, which is based in the Twin Cities, has an office here, that this group's involvement is an injection of partisan politics into the city council races.
Sure. And Pat says Faith in Minnesota wants Rochester to become a Minneapolis or St. Paul. And Pat says, let's vote for common sense and not for those outsiders pushing their agenda in our city.
I wonder the impact, because Duluth went through something similar in the last election cycle in their mayoral race. The city mayor at the time was backed by a lot of, Twin Cities Democrats. That'd be the easiest way to put it. They were donating considerable amounts of money for advertisements in favor of the incumbent, who held views similar to those that you see being pushed by the Minneapolis City Council, which is a partisan council, by the way. Minneapolis for a long time has had party politics included with their city council races. That mayor lost the election to a candidate who was pointing out, who was still a Democrat, but a much more moderate Democrat with pro-business leanings, who took pains to point out the quote-unquote outside influences that were affecting the mayoral race in Duluth. And obviously, by the results, the city voters in the city of Duluth rejected the outside influence coming in from the Twin Cities. So whether or not this helps those candidates or hurts those candidates, we'll wait until next month to find out.
Yeah, and then Pat is suspicious of candidates who allegedly took money from the group, and they were saying, but we won't let the money influence our vote. Pat finds that contention unpersuasive.
Well, it's good to hear from the retired Pat Carroll, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's still busy, but he's appreciate him listening.
Anything else for the mailbag, or are we ready to take a break?
Break time.
Good deal. We'll take the break. Back in a moment. Rochester Today with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell on News Talk 1340 KROC AM at 96.
Paul Trombley.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back. Good morning. Rochester Today, Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom. State News, Tom. What do you have up?
Tom Emmer in Congress, Minnesota representative, Republican, is the majority whip in that body and has considerable power. And he and Congressman Brian Steele sent a letter demanding answers from the Department of Public Safety in Minnesota and the Office of Secretary of State. Yeah, I'm confused what Walz has done or not done with driver's licenses, and then do people who get them have the right to vote even if they're illegal? And that seems like there's a pathway to it. But so those two gentlemen are demanding answers, and they say Democrats passed a new law which automatically registers people to vote when they apply for or update their driver's licenses. And Democrats also passed a law which allows illegal immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. And as such, there are concerns that ineligible people have become registered to vote. Is there a danger that some have? And additionally, it was reported that a legal resident, a non-citizen in Minnesota, but a legal resident, revealed that they had received a primary ballot in the mail. They did not register to vote. They did not intend to vote. They did not request the ballot. And the congressman said only American citizens should be voting. It's common sense. And so Brian Steele, the chairman of the Committee on House Administration, and Emmer sent a letter Tuesday to the entities we mentioned, and they were joined by Emmer's Republican congressional colleagues, Representative Stauber, Fischbach, and Finstad. And they said, is this a combination of automatic voter registration and voting? Is it happening? And referencing the roughly 1,000 records that they were involved with, the letter said ineligible voting is a disservice to Minnesota, and the DPS commissioner and Minnesota Secretary of State were asked questions, and they said that it is not being abused, it is not happening. But and the Secretary of State's office discussed inactivated records and said some issues had been found and remedied, and nothing to see here.
Yeah, it's interesting, the question. It's on the one side, you have the Secretary of State's office and the Walz administration saying, there is no problem here. We have safeguards in place. In order to register, you need to prove your citizenship. It requires documentation. But yet when they were pressured to do an audit might be the best way to term it, of what was happening in the real world, they found about 1,000 of these registrations took place in situations where they weren't supposed to take place.
Yeah.
So how good are the safeguards? I think that's the main question.
And can that possibly be discovered and remedied before the election? Governor Walz, the vice presidential candidate for the Harris campaign, was on Fox News Sunday. They evidently figured they needed to clean things up, and if they went on a conservative outlet, it would increase their possibilities. But they ran into a very congenial and bright Shannon Bream, who hosts Fox News Sunday. And she also is an attorney and very sharp. She went after Walz, and she said, you have lied on several occasions about military rank, carrying a weapon in war, DUI arrest, your being in Hong Kong and China and Tiananmen Square. And people say you can't get away with it. And Walz kept saying, well, my grammar is not right. I'm a knucklehead and I misspeak. And Bream wouldn't let him off the hook. She said, what do you say to the American people that simply do not trust you? You're going to be the potential commander-in-chief as a vice president. How can anybody trust you? And Walz said, people hear me speaking passionately. They know what I mean. They know I make mistakes. I don't think people care. Gosh, for arrogant. I don't think people care. I'm proud of my record. But Bream just wouldn't let him off the hook. She went down the list, and he always has answers, that guy, but incredible, Andy.
Well, I don't know if those are answers. Those are just deflections. To say people don't care. I mean, but they do. I mean, they do call him Teflon Tim for a reason.
Yeah.
CNN, of all places, last week published a scathing report about our governor, mainly focusing on the many financial scandals that have occurred in his administration, most notably the Feeding Our Future fraud scandal, $250 million or more of federal funds being diverted through fraud away from nutrition programs, but also other examples of lax oversight of state programs that have occurred during the administration. And the story was based upon comments made and documents provided by the state legislative auditor, which is a nonpartisan position whose task it is to serve as a watchdog for the state government on its programs to look for waste, fraud, and abuse. And I was a little surprised that this article came from CNN because it threw a lot of really direct punches towards Governor Walz. And there are many who would say that these stories should have been written by a Minnesota publication. You and I have talked about the fraud scandals within the Walz administration for years now. And you're right, there seems to be no accountability, and that's a lot of what this article is about, that there's been no accountability, that the commissioners who run these departments are still on the job, apparently have not faced any sort of discipline, at least none that has been documented and reported to the public. None of these commissioners have lost their jobs because of these massive fraud incidents that have occurred during the Walz administration, largely connected to the pandemic, and usually that's the excuse that is used, that all this money was flying around and it was very hard to keep track of. But if you read the reports on the Feeding Our Future fraud case, you become a bit incredulous when you hear the reports. There was one woman who pleaded guilty last week in federal court, and her group was submitting fraudulent claims for reimbursement of meals served in Pelican Rapids, a town of a little bit over 2,000 people in northwestern Minnesota, that they were serving 23,000 meals. It wouldn't take much of an oversight to catch that. You would think. But so I would urge anybody to look it up. I think you just can Google CNN Walz audit, and it'll come up right away, and you can read about it. But it's based upon the information provided by Minnesota's legislative auditor, and it's quite scathing.
President Trump was in Juneau, Wisconsin. We'll put Wisconsin in our Minnesota news, our near neighbor, and Juneau, Wisconsin. And the Wisconsin sheriff's rally was with him, and the spokesman for the Wisconsin sheriffs got up to the podium and was very articulate in his support of Trump. And the sheriff's representative said, "Mr. President, we are proud to announce that all of these sheriffs support you in Wisconsin. In Dodge County in this election, there are 0 drop boxes for the election. Our city clerks are fantastic. We're going to make sure that we have the best, most secure election in Dodge County history," the sheriff's representative said. And then Trump got to the podium and thanked the gentleman, and he said, "Our police forces are magnificent, and anyone like Kamala Harris, who has endorsed defunding police, is not fit to be the president of this nation." Firefighters are mixed in their support. Some groups are supporting Trump, some are supporting Harris. I don't know why firefighters would support Harris.
I don't know what's at play there either, but yeah, the whole alphabet soup of endorsement news and commercials is a little bit overwhelming for most folks. Yeah. All right. It's time for a break for news already, Tom. Back in just a few minutes after this quick news update. Rochester Today will return on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96 FM. Good morning. Welcome back from the news break. Andy Brownell with Tom Ostrom, Rochester Today, Tuesday morning. Switch around and tackle some national news, Tom. What's up first?
Over 200 retired generals and admirals, those are the top ranked position in the U.S. Army and the Navy and the Coast Guard and the U.S. Marine Corps. over 200 retired generals and admirals have endorsed Trump for president, and these are people who are no longer in the military. If they were in the military, of course, they couldn't do that. And Trump has been endorsed by hundreds of national security experts, former military members, as we mentioned, and Gold Star families. And Gold Star families are those that have lost a loved one, a family member in combat. But these people are for Trump. And an open letter organized by a former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, and a former National Security Council Chief of Staff, Gray, said the repeated failures of the Biden administration on this front are inexcusable and dangerous. We've had peace under President Trump, and now we are closer to a third world war than we've ever been. Open borders that allow terrorists to flood in, and China operating unabated against our interests. And like I say, it included Gold Star families, and it's quite a litany of supporters. And then FEMA. This is my editorial comment after studying all kinds of articles. The horrific, devastating southeast U.S. flooding in red pro-Trump states. I mentioned my concern that this could prevent, if these people aren't aided and infrastructure built, could prevent pro-Trump voters from voting. And FEMA's lack of funding could be a political thing, I think. And Department of Homeland Security head Mayorkas declared FEMA is out of money. We're funding overseas nations, Ukraine and others, but we're out of money. And civilian trucks have tried to get into the devastated areas. FEMA employees have tried to stop them, calling it interference. The Transportation Secretary said no drones are allowed to go over the area. And a Democrat activist on a talk show, Axelrod, who was an Obama advisor, smirked when he said, this is going to make it difficult for Trump supporters to vote. We think liberal voters will vote. They're higher income, and they will find a way around it, but we don't think Trump supporters will be good at this. And again...
He actually said that, huh?
Yes, he said that. And FEMA abandoned, one example, FEMA abandoned a devastated North Carolina town, and the people that live there said nobody's bringing in supplies except civilians. And FEMA said they can't get in here because there's a road closed sign entering our devastated city, and people are furious about it. They're picking up the pieces. And a lady who lives there is a distinguished health researcher from Buffalo, New York, and she lived in a place called Bat Cave. Bridges and highways were collapsed, and people can't get in there. FEMA called me, she said. They wanted to inspect my house, then called back, said they couldn't drive around the road closed sign. But you know who is driving around closed road signs? Civilians with trucks, and helicopters are coming to help us. But not FEMA. FEMA hasn't been here. We got apple orchard workers. We got local contractors, people with chainsaws working to clear the roads and get to us. And but FEMA has failed, and the town has been ripped in half and isolated, and incompetence at FEMA. And again, FEMA tried to stop locals. Buttigieg, transportation secretary, backed off on the drone thing, and some helicopters have gotten through.
The optics are not good, that's for sure. No. How much of this was inevitable because of the conditions on the ground, I don't know, because I'm not there. But you're right. It doesn't look good when the TV cameras show civilians in pickup trucks making their way to the victims, where the FEMA people are not doing it. And, a month ahead of an election, I can see why the Biden administration is on the defensive in this situation.
Yeah.
But it's going to get worse because this Hurricane Milton, due to arrive later on today, could cause potentially even worse devastation across Florida, central Florida. A crew from RPU, Rochester Public Utilities, along with some other utilities, from cities around the state, they're caravanning down there as we speak. They left yesterday, or did they? No, they left Monday. I'm sorry. And they're supposed to arrive, 12 hours before the hurricane's arrival in the Orlando area to be ready to try to restore power when this thing moves through. It's just, my heart goes out to the people being hit by this thing.
And you wonder if people will be able to vote and infrastructure will be accommodated in people's registrations. It could be hundreds of thousands of voters influenced there. Do we have time for another item?
In this areas of Florida, it could be in the millions.
You bet. Yeah, time for another one? Or would we?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. More ridiculousness from the Biden-Harris administration. Unconscionable arrogance and ignorance. Kamala Harris announced for Hurricane Helene victims, we're going to give them all $750 apiece. $750. And this after the Biden administration announced another $8 billion for the Ukraine. It's just outrageous. Their arrogance, they're unbelievable in their biases and in their ignorance. $750 for people who need homes replaced and food and jobs and everything else. But Ukraine gets at the same time billions of dollars, and they've had almost $200 billion sent to them since the war began. And Congressional Republican Representative Tom Tiffany, a Republican of Wisconsin, posted on X, $750 for Hurricane Helene victims, $175 billion to the Ukraine, free flights, health care, housing, and food for illegal immigrants. To the Biden administration and Kamala Harris, American citizens seem to come last.
Once again, the optics are terrible for the Biden administration and Kamala Harris heading into the election with these natural disasters. I will point out the $750 for immediate needs, housing and food immediately in the aftermath of the hurricane, and that there's a promise of more aid to come. But it's pretty hard to ignore the comparisons that you made as well, particularly when you hear the stories about New York City putting up the asylum-seeking migrants in luxury hotels, and it's even cost the city of New York, I believe, over $1 billion to do this. So the money, this country has the money. It just has it allocated the wrong way. And I know the Biden administration will explain to you that it's all in silos, that the FEMA funding for disasters is appropriated by Congress, and this is how much is in this silo, and this money that's going to help the illegal migrants is in this silo, and they can't be mixed. But you know what? We've seen them mix funds before when it's to their liking and there's an emergency involved.
Sure. I mean, $175, you can run up a $100 grocery bill very quickly going to the store nowadays.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. It takes nothing to spend $100 at the grocery store nowadays. And you're right, $750 is not going to get you very far. Get you a couple nights in a hotel room and maybe a couple meals, and then you're going to be out of cash. Okay. Yeah. Well, my prayers go out to the people in that area dealing with this disaster, and my prayers go to the people along the coast of Florida and the Tampa Bay area, Fort Myers area, and those inland who are going to apparently be dealing with a horrific disaster over the next day or so as Hurricane Milton comes ashore. Oh. Okay. We'll take a break, Tom. Come back with more Rochester Today in a few minutes. I'm Andy Brownell. Tom Ostrom's here. It's News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
It's Rochester Today. Tom Ostrom and Andy Brownell. Tuesday. Obviously, foreign affairs, Tom. The ongoing conflicts in the Middle East at the top of the agenda for most news coverage happening in the world. The tensions extraordinarily high as the Israelis continue to face down what is essentially our arch enemy. One of the biggest threats posed internationally to the United States and the West is the Iranians, and the Iranians have been pulling the levers in all of these attacks against the Israelis, and yesterday marking the 1-year anniversary of the Hamas atrocities in Gaza. So a lot of reflection taking place in op-ed pages across our land, and it's been heartening for me to read that many of them are pointing out what did happen on October 7th and the horrible, evil actions of those Hamas fighters as they pushed into those Israeli settlements and murdered, raped, and pillaged. And those, I don't even know if those words accurately describe what happened, but and then the ongoing response by the Israelis a year later, and many of these columnists and talking heads are pointing out that the Israelis, in a lot of ways, have done the United States and Western powers a great favor by curbing the Iranians' ability to wage war using its proxies in that region and drawing more and more attention to the threat posed by the Iranians and their potential nuclear capabilities.
Yes, Middle East Arab nations are pleased with that because Iranians are their enemy too. The Iranians are Persian; they're not Arab. They've had plenty of wars between each other.
Well, there's no denying they're one of the most destabilizing influences in the entire world today. Right,
and Israel has said they're going to get back at Iran at their time, and it'll come in the future. But Biden, meanwhile, is telling Israel, when you retaliate, don't hit Iran's nuclear program. That is just outrageous. And then the Biden administration said there are no U.S. troops in war zones today. They just lie about everything, or else they're hopelessly ignorant. The U.S. military in the last month killed 37 terrorists in Syria, and because there's ISIS and Al-Qaeda linked leaders killed by U.S. forces. That doesn't get much publicity.
No, it doesn't. It's a very dangerous world we're living in today, as you have pointed out in the past, and the forces aligned against our best interests seem to be getting more and more emboldened, other than the Iranians, who seem to have found some restraint, and I would call it very little restraint, continue seeing the activities, but perhaps they are seeing the handwriting on the wall that the capabilities of the Israelis and the Western forces are far more than they can handle. But the danger is, if they are allowed to get the nukes, I don't doubt that they'd use them.
Sure.
Which is frightening as it could be.
I think Israel has bunker-busting bombs that'll get at some of these nuclear sites. And now the U.S. military leaders, the U.S. is sending more troops to the Middle East as violence between Israel and Hezbollah and other things are happening. We're sending more troops. Major General Pat Ryder, as we head toward World War III, is the Pentagon press secretary. He wouldn't say how many more forces will be deployed or what they'll be tasked to do. And there are 40,000 troops in that region now, and an aircraft carrier and 2 Navy destroyers are headed to the region. And it's just, and the spokesperson for the Pentagon said, I'm not commenting on specifics for security reasons, as Israel is striking inside Lebanon and waiting to strike at at Iran later. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin called Israeli Defense Minister Gallant and talked about issues, so a lot of things happening.
I just observation. I do not believe that the Netanyahu administration cares at all what Biden has to say.
Yeah, right.
Or Blinken, for that matter.
Right.
They're going to pay forward with their plans regardless of what U.S. politicians have to say. And the polling suggests that the majority of Israeli citizens are firmly behind that stance. Obviously, there are divisions within the Israeli voting bloc over a variety of issues, but in the aftermath of October 7th, I think there is a sense of unity among Israelis that they're not talking anymore.
No, that's right. And again, I don't understand the Biden take on those things. And a key Ukrainian town has fallen to Russian troops. The town resisted Russian troops for 2 years, but it's been overwhelmed now. It's a coal mining town, and Vladimir Putin's forces have moved in. High casualties in both sides, Ukrainian and Russian, but it's in the region of Donetsk, and Russian attacks have prevailed there now, and Moscow has now seized about a fifth of the Ukraine, a fifth of their territory after 2 years of fighting. And Putin said we're there to denazify the country. And there was a Nazi element in the Ukraine in World War II. It was significant, and there's still a Nazi element in the Ukrainian army. They even have Nazi insignias on their uniform, and Zelensky won't talk about that much. But anyway, Russian superiority is prevailing, and Ukraine is still being challenged. I think the Ukraine president, a layman, a civilian, an entertainer, is doing a really good job of getting money and of showing resolve and creativity. I think he's been a good leader, but he's got his hands full.
Oh my gosh, that'd be probably the understatement of the year.
Yeah.
But the cost to Russia is immense. They are losing their young men at a rate that is going to have long-lasting effects on their society. Hundreds of thousands of young men dead already. And if you believe the stories that you're reading, they are taking these young people with very little training and more or less saying, run towards the line, and they're piling up bodies.
Yeah, sure.
And they're using that to determine the Ukraine positions and obviously striking with artillery and other forces to make these incremental advances in the Donbas region. But these young men fighting in this war for Russia are truly fodder. There seems to be no thought to the lives being lost for what? And because by the time they take over these regions, other than the natural resources that exist in the ground, they're leveled. Whatever value they had has been greatly diminished by the devastation caused by the conflict.
That's right. But the Ukraine's having trouble, too. They're having high casualty rates.
They are.
They're having young men flee the country. And the Ukraine military is starting to, when they see young men on the streets in civilian clothes, they're grabbing them up and enlisting them.
Well, I wonder how long before that's happening in Russia. Putin continues to claim that he's able to meet his recruitment goals, but there's a lot of worry within Russia of, what do you call it, conscription.
Yeah, right. The draft.
Forced entry into the military, and there's a certain level of hopelessness that's tied with that, with these young men considering the type of conflict that they've been asked to fight.
That's right. But Putin running a horrendous dictatorship can execute dissenters even publicly, and Ukraine can't do that.
Yeah, once again, long-range costs. But I think what he's doing will ultimately lead to the demise of Putin. I don't think you can inflict that kind of pain on a country long-term. Obviously, you can hold the reins of power for a period of time, but eventually the angst of your country, the people living there, and their displeasure over what is happening to their young people is going to have an impact. I just firmly believe that. I think this will be Putin's demise. But when it will happen, I don't know.
Well, I think there'll be a negotiated peace if Trump is president, and the war will be settled, and that will mean an exchange of territory, and Russia will get the Russian-speaking regions that have a lot of resources. But whether Zelensky will support that or even do that or be replaced if he doesn't, a lot of question marks.
Big time question marks for sure. All right, we have to run. My goodness. An hour is already up, Tom. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. I look forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's Rochester Today with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell, News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.